everybody. Welcome back. Zach and I here again to talk about all things financial planning. Zach, how's it going?
It's going well, just hanging in there another week. Glad that seems like people's lives are moving more in the direction of normal. But based on the meme here on the screen, it seems like some of us are walking away with some extra skills than we started all this with.
Yeah, we were laughing about this. There's something that really makes me want to go learn how to do that skill. That just looks awesome. Might be a little messy though in the learning curve. I don't know, but I do hope that all of you are finding ways to develop new skills and entertain your family and friends, perhaps, if nothing else, during this extended time at home we all have together. But that's our tip of the hat to coronavirus this week. I'm going to stop that, and Zach, we're going to get a little more into our topic for today. When did you start working with me? It's been going on 10 years now. Was it
almost 10 years? Almost
10 years, yeah. And so during that time, I would have to guess you've done, I don't know, at least 150 to 200 plans over that period of time for various clients with us.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, probably
something like
200,
that.
Somewhere around there. It'd be interesting to go back, and I don't know how we'd figure that out, but
well, I don't either, but
it's got to be a couple hundred.
Yeah, suffice to say that the discussion you and I are going to have today, you've had this discussion many times, and you've actually been behind the scenes building the plan. Largely, that's one of the ways you learned. And of course, Sydney is also going through that process now with us as well. I don't know how many of these I've done over the years, but it's a considerable number. And we thought that that as this week's topic, what we would do is look at a hypothetical client situation and say, it's one thing to talk about financial planning and retirement planning and all of that, but that can sometimes just kind of those words can be a little hollow. And we thought we would take folks kind of behind the scenes and look at a sample case and say, what do we look at? And we're gonna focus in today mainly on retirement planning aspect. Obviously, we do all kinds of different planning, estate planning, investments, etc. But today we thought we would have a discussion around just when it comes to retirement modeling. What does that look like? And what kinds of things do we look for as advisors, both when we're building the plan and then also when we're thinking about what changes would make sense that would improve things overall. So we're going to take a look at that today. And then we're also going to draw a very timely and relevant conclusion that we've learned in the trenches. I know you've learned it big time in the last few months, as have I, in conversations with clients. We're gonna kind of nail down a very important point about having a plan and why it can be so important during times like this. But let's dig into this thing a little bit first, and we'll introduce everybody. You seeing the screen share there, Zach? Okay. All right.
All good.
So we're going to introduce you to Fred and Wilma Flintstone. Kind of a tip of the hat to the '60s. Many of us grew up watching that show. Fred and Wilma, our clients here, have two kids, Pebbles and Bam Bam. They're young to middle-aged teenagers, and Fred and Wilma are in their mid-50s. And so, Zach, we're going to pretend that Fred and Wilma came to us, and they're thinking about retiring in their mid-60s right here. And today they're 55 and 53 years old, and they've done well working at the rock quarry over the years and saved up about $4.5 million of investable assets. And so I thought, let's go through this and talk about, well, what are we looking at on this graph first, and then we'll kind of break it down from there. So why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about what we're looking at on this particular graph, Zach, as a base scenario?
Yeah, so this is, we call this our decision center. It's a view that we have looked at with a lot of you in our planning software, and those blue bars in that graph represent a year of your life. So you can see on the far right of the chart, it goes to age 95. A lot of times we're raising that to 100, or sometimes even a little bit older. People's life expectancies are going up, and we have people in their mid 90s we're regularly talking with. So, but it's really just to say, hey, if we look out 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in the future, and we make some basic assumptions, how does it look from a visual perspective? And I think that's probably the big thing, Bob, is, we can look at tables of numbers, but visual representations of things tend to just really be a lot more informative for us and most people. So it's been a good tool.
Yeah, and this is a real simple graph that we're looking at here. This, if you each blue bar, think of that as representing your pile of money. So in this case, the pile of money starts off at 4.6 million, and it looks like it's growing, and then it starts to go down. And of course, we can probably guess that that's when they start drawing income, right? But another way that we look at this is just the cash flow. Where's the income coming from? And this is a little busier looking graph, Zach, but kind of explain what this means and why we look at this.
So this graph is actually, whereas the other entirely blue one represented the pile of money, this goes behind that and says, okay, each year we have money coming in, maybe Social Security, a pension, while we're working our salary. Mm-hmm. And this is also showing the money going out. So the expenses that we have, withdrawals, taxes, all of that stuff. And so it's really, whereas the blue graph, it's not really showing the pluses and minuses through each year. Mm-hmm. It's kind of showing the end result. This one's actually drilling down into what is going on behind that.
Yeah, one of the things I like about this graph is it lets you easily see, like this orange tabs here, that wasn't going on up until that year, but then something changed. Well, what happened is Fred became age 72 and he had an IRA, so he had to start taking minimum required distributions. It used to be 70 and a half, now it's 72. But this visually shows you where your income's coming from. So those are the kinds of things we look at when we're starting. But, obviously, Zach, sometimes when we do these plans, our starting point, which we call the base facts or the base scenario, sometimes they don't ever run out of money, and sometimes they do. But whatever happens, one of our roles is to go in and do what we call stress testing. And that is what would make it fail, and then is there something that from a planning standpoint that can be done to prevent that from happening. Obviously, the future is unknown. We don't know about health. We don't know about economies. We don't know about returns on markets. There's so many things we don't have any control over. So all we can do is try to be thorough and plan as well as we can, and cover our bases as well as we can. And all you can do is the best you can do. And so then you're pretty much going to have to just go and live your life and adjust accordingly going forward. But in this case, right out of the bat, we see that at the assumed rates of return under the base scenario, the plan is running out of money before they get to 95. So we would say, all right, what needs to happen to improve this? And one of the most basic things we can look at, this plan was assuming about a 5.5% rate of return. What happens if maybe we get a little bit better rate of return on investments long term? So you can see rate of return can make a big difference. 6% gets them really close to their life expectancy. 7%, of course, is that much stronger. Now, this tool, we tell people all the time, Zach, this tool is not predicting returns or anything. This is a decision-making tool, and it allows us to compare A to B. And it also, what we've found over the years, I know you've seen this many times, a lot of times clients come in and they're thinking, well, I want to get such and such return on my money, but they don't really know why that is an important number, that it's not tangible. It's just kind of like, well, that sounds like pretty good if I could get 6% of my money. But really what you need to know is what's the return you need for your plan to work. We call that in
Yeah.
our office the family index number, right? Some families need 7 or 8%, and that's spooky because that's a high rate of return to have to get. Others need 3-4%, and they're going to be fine. But that's one of the first places we start, right? When we do these plans, is we want to know what realistic rate of return is going to be necessary for the plan to work.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the big thing. It's taking a look at things in a vacuum to compare side by side. If everything else was the same and we changed just one variable, how does that affect things? And this has been really helpful. I know for taking a look at this for some people, that going back to that family index number you mentioned, sometimes we can take a look and say, hey, if things go as planned for you guys, you only really need to make 2.5%. And they're saying, geez, I thought I was feeling real anxious because I felt like we needed to take a lot of risk for my plan to work. And then we go back and we model in a much lower return than we anticipate. And it can really give a sense of relief to say, hey, we only need to get 2.5%, or maybe, if we want to do a lot of travel in the next 10 years, we can 3.5% we'll be able to travel and not have anything to worry about. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it helps to look at this and bring it all back to the plan. But the biggest thing I get from this and see that it does for our clients, Bob, is really like the emotional side of it, the psychological side of looking at this stuff. So maybe you can touch on that for a second.
Well, you're absolutely right, Zach, and I try to always explain to anybody we are in the early stages of working with that there's 3 things that we believe will eventually add to improving the quality of someone's life. The first thing is clarity. Clarity about what you have to work with and about what it is you want out of life, right? I think the more clarity you have, the less confusion there is. I think that's a win. The second thing is simplicity. The more you can simplify your life, the less confusion and distraction you have. And so you're more able to go back to step number 1, be clear about what you really care about and work on that. And the third thing is delegation. There's some things that I do and that you do, Zach. I know you love working on cars, for example. I'm not thrilled about working on cars. So you choose to do a lot of that yourself because you just love it and you're good at it. And that's great. For me, I've been outsourcing all of my car work for years, and it's not my strength, it's not my passion. So it can be as something like car maintenance, or doing your own yard, or having house cleaners, or whatever. All of these kinds of things, in addition to things like managing my money and things like that. If you love doing them, great, keep doing them. If you're good at it and you love doing them, do it. But if there are things you're not passionate about and you're not particularly good at, or you don't know if you're good at them, outsource as much of that by delegating it to people with accountability. And I think that if you can do those 3 things, you greatly improve your quality of life. That doesn't happen, at the snap of a finger. It's a process. And what we're trying to do with the planning process and going through these kinds of exercises is we're trying to give people a way to make more informed decisions so they can get that clarity. Then we're going to come through and try to help them figure out, hey, I've got 3 IRAs now. If I had 1 IRA, that would sure be a lot simpler. I'd have fewer statements, fewer emails, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, they can go through and systematically decide, do I really want to do my will myself and save some money, or do I want to outsource it to somebody I know is going to do an excellent job? Do I want to keep doing my tax return and think I'm getting it right, or do I just want to pay a professional to have them do it? So those are all delegation decisions. So it's a process, but clearly it all starts with one of the most fundamental questions is, do we have enough? Are we going to be okay? And I think ultimately that's the most common question I've heard over the years from people after we've been working with them for a while is, are we okay? The market sold off. Am I okay? And so this is one of the ways you can always kind of go back to and say, yeah, you're going to be fine, or no, we need to make some changes. Some of the other things, let's do a little bit more stress testing here, Zach. I think we've kind of laid a good foundation, but let's look at some of the variations we consider going through here. We already saw that the rate of return from the original assumption was probably not going to get the job done. So there's going to have to be some changes, most likely either in more assets to invest, or saving more, or they're going to have to get a better rate of return long term on their money. Inflation can also be a problem. That just makes a bad situation worse. So those are some of the basic things we start looking at. But then in Fred and Wilma's case, as we talked about that clarity piece of this, they said, yeah, really not just retire, but we'd really like to have some $20,000 a year of extra travel money for maybe the first 10 years of retirement. What if we, that the budget we gave you for us to live on was is okay, but if we weren't pinching pennies, what if we had an extra $10,000 a year that we wanted to spend? And so obviously, if it was already failing before and now we're spending more, it's going to fail that much earlier. So then we go back to saying, well, how does our better rate of return offset and absorb that extra lifestyle? Well, it helps, but it looks to me like the way this plan would be heading is you're going to have to realistically invest in a way to where you've got a realistic chance of getting somewhere between 6 and 7% long term, net of fees, net of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So those are a few of the basic things. And so what else can you do to improve your situation? Well, this showed them retiring at 64 and 62. What if they pushed retirement off to age 70? That helps. And also delayed Social Security rather than taking it at 64. That helps. They also were interested in some charitable giving, and maybe making a $20,000 gift to Pebbles for her wedding, maybe her down payment on her first stone cottage. What do we need to do to make all of these things work? Well, so some combination at this level of retiring a little later, getting a better rate of return on our money, it allows them to start thinking about doing all the things that matter to them and still not running out of money. So what we love about this tool, and what our clients usually love about it, is it takes all of these variables and puts them into a format to where you can see how they interact with each other. And now all of a sudden, that rate of return we're talking about is a real number. You see now why it matters. And that then leads into when you start talking about a whole nother discussion, which is investment decisions and portfolio build and all of that. But it all starts with planning. It all starts with planning. Anything you want to say about this before we look at some of the other scenarios, Zach?
No, I'll just say that man, this has probably been, as going back to what you said whenever we started looking at this, people want to know, am I going to be all right? Do I have enough? When we start working with some people and they've never even began to answer that question, I mean, it can be a pretty moving thing to get to the point where we can stress test a lot of times. A lot of times it's not like this where things are dying. Sometimes they are, but a lot of times people are realizing, hey, I've put in a lot of work over the years, and it's paid off for me, and it's a huge relief to know that in your head as a fact. But it's also even bigger sometimes to just have that weight off of your shoulders. And so that's probably been the thing that I like seeing the most in working with folks.
Yeah, no, we all have an image of ourselves in our mind's eye, and we've seen more than a few times when people have kind of had trouble reconciling what they're seeing on the screen with how they've always thought of themselves financially, and it can be quite a moving moment for folks. So let's look at a couple of the other typical scenarios, Zach. We got about another 9 minutes, and then we'll kind of make our final point we wanted to end with today. But we really try to be thorough when we do this stress testing we talked about. And one of the things that is usually lethal to just not every plan, but most plans. Is what we call a black swan event. Everybody remembers 2008, where the market fell roughly 50% in a matter of about 18 months from top to bottom. Of course, when we had 9/11, we were already into a market sell-off, and then we got hit with the second gut punch of the terrorist attack, and that was another roughly 50% sell-off. So those kinds of sell-offs don't happen very often. On average, about once every 20 years over the last 100 years in the United States, but they do happen, and you never know when the next one's going to happen. We had 2 of them last decade, which was really unusual. The period we're in right now felt like it was going to maybe be one of those, but so far, fingers crossed, it hasn't been that bad, but it was very intense and happened quickly. And so we always model in a black swan event. Now, in this case, we pushed this one out to 2030 and 31. The reason we did that for illustrating this is that we kind of just had this big sell-off, and we didn't want to show it on top of the sell-off that's already happened. So it's not.
Try.
I got to turn all these buttons off. Yeah, sorry about that. So here you can see it vividly. This was our original base scenario. And again, we're trying to say, what's going to make the bridge fail, right? What's going to make this thing crash and burn? We want to know that so we can do something about it before it happens. And in this case, we're showing a 25% drop right after they retire at 64, and then another 25% drop. So 50% market sell-off. And if they don't have their investments set up in such a way to where they can take some of that sell-off, that we call it a drawdown, out of keep that from happening to them, then obviously it accelerates. They were running out of money in their mid 80s. Now it's accelerated it by 10 years. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen. So we need to know that, and that also is going to have an impact. If we're managing their money, it's going to have a real impact on our thinking behind how they ought to allocate. Because on the one hand, they need to be looking at getting that 6 to 7% return to make the plan work. But on the other hand, they're very exposed to this risk. So you really have to go in and balance those two out. Mm-hmm. But that's one of I would say if there's any one thing that makes plans fail over the years, that's almost, maybe 9 out of 10 plans fail if there's not some plan in place to protect against it. I think this is probably the one that is the most impactful. Another thing that people are very aware of and concerned about are long-term care events. And in this case, it's not quite as visible as it would be otherwise, because they were already running out of money in their mid-80s. And we don't start this particular assumed long-term disability event until, I guess, probably Fred is age 80. But what this is showing is an extra $50,000 a year of spending in their normal budget on top of it. And it's been inflated with inflation out, right? And it's showing that for 5 years, if I got that right, Zach?
Right, yeah, and that in Texas, I think the average cost of that kind of healthcare event's like $55,000 a year. So I think it's showing $55,000 a year in today's dollars.
Yeah.
So if we go out, another 25 years at a typical inflation rate, that 55,000 is probably closer to 80.
Yeah. So in a case like this, the way to battle this is there's really 2 ways. One is accumulate enough assets to where you can essentially self-insure, and that doesn't appear to be happening here, not at least in the base plan. Let's say that they get the higher 7% returns. That kind of seems, I don't know if this is trumping that other scenario, Zach, when I turn that on. Is it overriding it? It shouldn't be.
No, it is. It's leveling off there probably at about age 80. You can see how the green line, it levels off. And so, those higher returns have helped a lot. And you can see that those extra expenses are taking away that growth.
Yeah, so if we see a graph like we saw before that, a lot, if it was an insurance salesman, they'd say, oh, see, you need long-term care insurance. We might say, well, wait, maybe, but maybe not. If you delay retiring to 70 and delay Social Security and you get a better rate of return on your assets, maybe you can still plan on self-insuring. Plus, this graph doesn't include the equity in your home and other things like that. So, but the important thing is it fosters a discussion. And so, one way or the other, you get it resolved and okay, no, I understand my risk there. I understand what my options are. So you're not worried about it, right? You're not worrying about something you're not sure about. And that's one of those things about bringing clarity we talked about earlier. So that's a very common one that we'll model. Let's see what else we got in here. They're still in their mid 50s. So what if they maximize their 401k plan and saved more? It makes a little bit of difference. It helps, but it really doesn't move the needle enough to really solve the problem. Still going to have to get that better rate of return. But it might take a little of the pressure off of the return. The more you save, the better. The 6% looks better now. And then I think we had one more on here. Oh yeah, they have a vacation home. And we said, well, okay, what if you decided you're not vacationing there as much as you wanted to, and maybe that money could be better productive if you sold it and then invested it, added it to your retirement savings? What would that look like? Again, it makes a difference. That with a little bit better rate of return can make a big difference. So all of these variables are working together to show A versus B and to make a more informed decision. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? One of our mottos in our office, Zach, is we guide, you decide. And our role is to give advice and to educate and to illustrate and help clients make more informed decisions. Now, we're running short on time here. We got a few more minutes, and I do want to. There's one more screen we wanted to share. Before we pop out of this, is there anything else that you think we ought to mention about this, particularly from a retirement planning point of view?
Yeah, I'll just say that this tool, it can always be informative, but there's particular times in someone's life where their situation really calls for this, and at other times it's not so important. When we start working with a lot of younger folks, it's a lot of times our conversations centering around, hey, I need to start saving, or I've got this money I've been saving. Is there a better way to do that? And so a lot of times, many of you, we've started working with you, haven't really dove deep into this type of planning tool just because it really wasn't the priority at the time. But eventually, it seems like for most people, things do eventually get to a point where utilizing a tool like this is paramount to maybe not getting somewhere, but at least getting ourselves to the proper understanding.
Yeah. I mean, life is seasonal, and you're right. I mean, somebody in their 30s, this particular discussion is not going to be as relevant because it's still 30 years away. They're focused on other things in life at that stage, probably their marriage and their lifestyle, and maybe kids and college and management of debt and taxation and investing and all of those. So we may not go deeply into this for those folks, but for folks who come and they're maybe for the first time ever pulling everything together, and they just know this is a lot. I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure if we have enough. This kind of discussion is very, very helpful in our experience for those folks at that stage. So there's another reason though, Zach, why having a plan like this to refer back to is really important. And we're going to wrap this up today by kind of making that point. And it's very timely. We've had dozens and dozens of phone calls and Zoom meetings with clients over the last 2.5 months, driven by people's concerns over the market and whatnot. And I'm going to stop sharing this for a second and then share this other image, and we'll wrap it up. But I want you, you have many of those review calls, Zach. And so I love a simple drawing that makes a powerful point, right? Anybody who takes a second to look at this, it's instantly obvious what this is saying. We all want to, buy low and sell high, but the reality is, and research has shown this over and over again, that our tendency as human beings is to do just the opposite, right? We are emotional creatures. So why don't you kind of explain this problem and how the plan helps us serve people when it comes to this problem.
Yeah, I think that this ties in with the previous tool we were looking at a lot more than would be immediately apparent. I mean, just an hour ago, or at 11 this morning, I was talking with a husband and wife that we've been working with for years, um, and we jumped back into the tool and we looked at their plan and we reviewed, hey, here's where things are at, here's the return that you need to get. Um, they when I started speaking with them this morning, they were kind of at a place of feeling a little anxious about things. Um, I would say if we had to pick between greed and fear, they were more in the fear camp at this point. And so I think when anybody gets to the point where we either get greedy or we get fearful, um, we get anxious and we start thinking about stuff. And the only thing that we really know how to do, it's almost instinctual. We start to be reactive to our emotions. And it's hard. If we're reactive, most of us, if we were reactive to our emotions, we would end up doing exactly what's on the screen here.
Yeah.
And so this morning when we were talking, my goal was really to say, hey, how do we not even have to get to the point where we're looking to our emotions? How is there a way that we can be comfortable not feeling like we need to just go based on how we're feeling in the moment? And it really goes back to that plan and the thing we were just looking at, Bob. We went back in, we looked at their plan and said, hey, you guys, you only need to get about a 2.5% return for your plan to work. I know you guys want to travel. And so we don't need to be too aggressive, but we don't need to be fearful and greedy either. We can just take a modest, balanced approach to the investments. And if we do that, then we don't have to get into this world here where we're trying to make timing decisions, right? Once we know that we can rest knowing that we don't have to be concerned about this, then we can say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to set my emotions to the side for a second as much as I possibly can and try to focus on going back and remembering that plan.
All right. Yeah. And being able for you to be able to do that and them realize that the plan they're looking at now represents their current values. It's not, so they already see that, oh, even though I'm down, whatever I'm down, 5 or 10%, the plan it still works. It just, in my experience, it just takes a lot of the fear out of it because you realize, wait, we're okay. We're going to be okay. So yeah, so thanks for sharing that. Well, Zach, we're out of time, so we're going to wrap it up. I will remind everybody, we can't take live questions during these for compliance reasons, but we can invite you to send your email questions to us, and we will definitely respond. If you have somebody that this kind of approach to helping people with making better financial decisions with the right advice might make sense for, please put them on to us, because we haven't skipped a beat during this session. We're still talking with people virtually, and we're working with people very efficiently right now. So we're happy to meet new folks if you have somebody we can help. Zach, next week we're going to dig into a topic. You're going to kind of lead us through a discussion on something that comes up often, and that is these rules around making gifts to our kids or to anybody. And people are always confused about what are the tax aspects of that and how much and how often. And so we thought we would kind of break down the rules for folks and try to make it interesting and not dull. So we'll have that discussion next week, same time, same place. But otherwise, that is going to be it for today. Thank you guys for being with us, and we're here if you need us. Otherwise, have a safe and blessed week. Thank you. Bye-bye.